for all of your religious practices and activity, you are still on the outside looking in as it relates to the kingdom of God. Being religious cannot make anyone good enough to get them into heaven. And it might look, as we look at Jesus speaking to him there in verse 3, it might appear that Jesus has just disregarded everything that Nicodemus has said to him, observations related to him as a teacher that has come from God and a rabbi and so forth. And then Jesus just abruptly ignores it and then heads into some kind of a conversation of his own. He changes the subject to one of his own choosing. And that is not what is happening here at all. Jesus simply built on Nicodemus's confession of him as a teacher come from God, and he proceeded then to speak to Nicodemus of the most important thing that he needed to hear from God. And that is that what is required in order to see in Jesus' word in verse 3, and then to enter Jesus' word in verse 5, the kingdom of God, that is to enter into heaven, what is required is a spiritual birth. It requires being born again. And it's important to notice in the nuttiness of the age in which we live, that born again, speaking of Christians, is not speaking about some particular quality of Christian. So often even people have this idea of Christianity, that you have all these different kinds, and then you've got those born-againers. You cannot be a Christian without being born again. It's the very means by which we enter the kingdom of God and then enter into a fellowship with God. There are no Christians apart from being born again, as Jesus describes it here. Now, notice in verse 4 that Nicodemus was tracking with Jesus. He understood his spiritual position to be one of on the outside looking in terms of the kingdom of God. So he turns his focus now to the event that Jesus stated as being required to enter into the kingdom of God. And he asked Jesus, how can one be born again? And the emphasis is on the word how. And so in his mind kind of breaks as he's trying to understand what it means to be born again. Because he can only think of birth in his mind in physical terms. So he thinks Jesus is saying a person needs to experience a second physical birth. But again, in the humility that marks his life,